could you ever harm the person you love most? The person you trust, the person you believe would never hurt you? For most people, the answer is no. Love is built on safety, on care, on the belief that some lines will never be crossed. It's reinforced over time through shared moments, promises, and trust that feels unbreakable. But not every relationship follows that path. Sometimes what looks like love on the surface hides something far darker underneath. Control can disguise itself as care. Familiarity can become a shield for violence, and the person you trust the most can become the source of the greatest danger. My name is Alex Cross. This is Shadows of Evidence, and this is the case of Morgan, a case that forces us to confront how trust can be used, broken, and turned into something else entirely. This case involves assault, betrayal, and survival. The events described are real, and some details may be difficult to hear. If you are under 18, or if topics involving violence or abuse are overwhelming for you, please consider stepping away or returning at another time. What follows is not told for entertainment. It is a factual account of a real case, presented carefully, without exaggeration, and with respect for those affected. Listener discretion is advised. Please proceed with caution. The night of the attack began like any other, but it would turn into a terrifying ordeal for Morgan Metzer. She was at home, in the place she thought was safest. Just after midnight on New Year's Day, a masked man entered her house. He moved deliberately, with purpose. Morgan was caught off guard. The intruder pinned her down, striking her repeatedly with a firearm. The assault was physical, methodical, and violent. It was clear this was not a crime of opportunity. He strangled her, nearly rendering her unconscious, and restrained her hands with zip ties. Each moment was carefully controlled. Morgan could not see clearly. The intruder placed a pillowcase over her head, limiting her vision, disorienting her further. The attacker demanded her valuables, her phone, her jewelry. But he also knew personal details about her life. His voice, altered to sound low and gravelly, like a character from a Batman movie, tried to mask his identity, but the intrusion felt eerily familiar. Hours later, after leaving her bound and terrified on the back deck, the intruder's parting words lingered. "Do not move until you hear 2 car honks." Morgan was alone, isolated and vulnerable, forced to wait for someone she trusted to come to her aid. That person would soon arrive. Her ex-husband, Rod Metzer, the same man who had planned the attack. At first, there was no reason to suspect him. He freed her from the restraints, comforted her, and called 911. Trust had delayed suspicion, and that delay would become central to understanding the crime. This was not a brief encounter. It was deliberate, carefully orchestrated, and executed in a home where Morgan thought she was safe. Understanding the sequence of events, every calculated move, every moment of control, is key to grasping the full scope of what happened. Once Morgan had been rescued and the 911 call placed, the investigation began. Officers arrived quickly, assessing the scene with a focus on detail rather than speculation. At first glance, the home showed no forced entry. The window screen had been removed, and the alarm sensor carefully disabled. Whoever entered had intimate knowledge of Morgan's routines and her house. That fact immediately caught investigators' attention. Officers interviewed Morgan, her father, and her brother. Statements were consistent, calm, measured, but investigators noticed subtle inconsistencies in timing, phrasing, and reactions. Nothing screamed guilt, yet something felt off. Rod Metzer, who had arrived to help Morgan, also became a person of interest. He had been present during the aftermath, assisting, comforting, and ensuring she was safe. Investigators observed him closely, looking for anything that contradicted the scene or suggested prior knowledge. Digital evidence became central. Rod's phone revealed a hidden folder containing private images of Morgan, as well as pictures of her text messages with another man. These were taken without her consent. Browser searches included phrases like "how long to choke someone unconscious" and "how to crack an iPhone password." These digital footprints raised questions. Someone had researched methods consistent with the assault. Physical evidence supported these digital clues. A bag of zip ties, one of which perfectly matched a zip tie used on Morgan's wrists, was discovered in Rod's apartment. Each detail, from entry points to pre-planned restraints, built a pattern pointing not outward but inward. Investigators did not rely on assumptions. Each observation, each subtle inconsistency, was documented, analyzed, and cross-referenced. The case was no longer about who could have done this. It became a careful reconstruction of how it had been done. By the end of this stage, law enforcement had developed a clear, evidence-based profile. The attack was deliberate, calculated, and executed by someone who had access, opportunity, and knowledge, someone close. The truth did not arrive in a single moment. It emerged gradually as investigators reviewed evidence alongside Morgan's own growing sense of unease. Small details began to align, movements that felt familiar, knowledge that felt too precise. The masked attacker hadn't moved like a stranger. He had moved like someone who knew the house. As evidence was examined, the conclusion became unavoidable. The man who had comforted Morgan after the assault, her ex-husband, Rod Metzer, was the attacker. The crime had been staged. The mask was not meant to conceal forever, only long enough to redirect suspicion. The goal was control of the narrative, of proximity, of trust. For Morgan, the realization carried a second wound. The danger had never been outside her home. It had been allowed inside. When Rod Metzer was arrested, public reaction was swift. Many focused immediately on blame, on how someone capable of such planning could commit such violence. But at this stage, the story does not rush to judgment. The facts are still being assembled. The questions are only beginning to form. How did a picture-perfect love story turn into a nightmare? Morgan and Rodney Metzer met as teenagers. She was 14, he was 17. Morgan later described it as love at first sight. Rodney called her Princess, and for a time, the relationship felt ideal, almost storybook. They married in 2009. Morgan was 21, Rodney was 24. The early months were happy, but that stability did not last. 8 months into the marriage, Rodney's younger brother, Kevin, died from leukemia at 19. According to Morgan, the loss changed Rodney in lasting ways. The following year brought another devastating blow. Morgan's first child, a son named Kevin, was born with a congenital heart defect and survived only 18 days. The grief was overwhelming. In 2012, they welcomed twins, a boy and a girl. For a brief moment, joy returned. But not long after, Morgan says Rodney's behavior began to shift. Around the time the twins turned 1, Rodney lost his job. Morgan's interior design business, meanwhile, was thriving. She later described this period as the beginning of escalating control and abuse. The first physical incident occurred during a Labor Day weekend. Morgan called her father for help, but Rodney convinced those around them that she was at fault, that she had overreacted. What followed was a recurring pattern. Reality was rewritten, responsibility was shifted, and Morgan was made to doubt her own experiences. She later described prolonged psychological manipulation, repeated intimidation, and ongoing violence. Even their children were drawn into the distortion. Rodney claimed Morgan caused her own injuries. He accused her of acts she said never happened. Over time, the control became suffocating. In 2020, Morgan filed for divorce. By December, it was finalized. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. But Rodney was not finished. He told Morgan he was dying of pancreatic cancer. He presented falsified medical documents. Out of concern for the father of her children, Morgan allowed him to stay in her home. Rodney pushed for reconciliation. She refused. By New Year's Eve, Morgan insisted he leave. She told him she would spend the night at her parents' home. Rodney left, but the messages did not stop. Just after midnight on New Year's Day, 2021, Morgan awoke to an intruder in her home. The attacker was masked and armed. She was restrained, seriously injured, and left bound outside, with a warning not to move until she heard 2 car horns. Nearly 40 minutes passed. Then footsteps approached. A familiar voice spoke. Rodney's. At first, relief, then doubt. The way he moved, the way he lifted her. The details felt disturbingly familiar. Rodney called 911. He comforted her. But both Morgan and investigators sensed inconsistencies almost immediately. The investigation uncovered extensive evidence. Zip ties matching those used on Morgan had been purchased by Rodney days earlier. Internet searches revealed attempts to learn how to alter one's voice and incapacitate another person. Forged medical records were uncovered, surveillance photographs, monitoring of Morgan's private communications. The planning had been deliberate, methodical, calculated. Rodney Metzer later pleaded guilty to 14 charges. On August 4, 2021, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison, followed by 45 years of probation. Morgan now speaks publicly about coercive control, manipulation, and the dangers hidden behind carefully maintained appearances. "Everyone thought I had the perfect life," she later said. "If we were more honest about what we live with, maybe someone would hear, 'This isn't healthy.'" When the case reached court, the evidence spoke clearly. Investigators presented emails, text messages, and purchases tied directly to Rodney Metzer. The zip ties, the voice-altering searches, the falsified medical notes, all traced back to him. Despite his prior acts of deception, the court examined every detail carefully. Witnesses recounted the patterns of abuse, the subtle control, the gaslighting that had built over years. Rodney initially pleaded not guilty, but the mountain of evidence, digital, physical, and testimonial, left little room for doubt. Morgan's account was consistent, corroborated by text logs, photos, and prior statements she had made to friends and family. Each detail reinforced the timeline investigators had pieced together. The prosecution painted a picture of planning and control. The defense argued for a sudden, uncharacteristic act. But the facts contradicted that narrative. Rodney had carefully constructed the assault to appear as though it came from a stranger, masking his identity, manipulating perception, and delaying recognition. From the purchase of zip ties to the falsified medical notes, from monitoring messages to staging concern, every step was premeditated. In court, the judge emphasized the betrayal of trust as central to the case. Not only had Morgan survived a violent assault, but she had been deceived by someone she once trusted completely. Rodney was ultimately sentenced to 25 years in prison and 45 years of probation. Justice, measured and factual, had been served, but the impact of the crime of betrayal would linger far beyond the courtroom walls. Rodney's sentencing closed the legal chapter, but the effects of his actions extend far beyond prison walls. The families, friends, and community continue to grapple with the betrayal and the shock of what occurred. While justice was served, the emotional and psychological impact cannot be measured in years or months. Trust, once shattered, leaves marks that endure. The patterns, behaviors, and choices that led to this crime offer lessons for vigilance, awareness, and understanding, a reminder of the complexities of human relationships. The case also sparks broader reflection. How can communities detect warning signs earlier? How can individuals protect themselves from manipulation and exploitation? These questions linger long after verdicts are delivered. Ultimately, the law acted decisively, but the story serves as a cautionary reminder. Even measured justice cannot erase the ripple effects of betrayal and harm. Awareness, education, and vigilance remain the strongest defenses against such tragedies. Every case leaves traces beyond the courtroom. Every betrayal, every decision, every hidden pattern tells a story that the law can measure, but the mind and heart remember differently. The facts are clear. The person responsible was held accountable. Justice, measured and factual, has been served. But the echoes of this crime, of trust broken, of innocence harmed, linger far beyond the walls of any courtroom. For those who followed closely, this story isn't about shock or sensationalism. It's about understanding how events unfold, how patterns emerge, and how human choices shape outcomes. Each detail, each anomaly, was gathered with patience, care, and precision. And while the verdict marks the end of the legal journey, the lessons remain. Trust can be fragile, appearances can deceive. The quiet moments often reveal the truth louder than the loud ones ever could. This is Shadows of Evidence. We bring the facts, no exaggeration, no distraction, just the story as it unfolded. The responsibility, the consequences, and the enduring impact all stand on their own. This is just part of the story. There's more coming, deeper looks, new insights, and the full scope of what we've uncovered. Stay safe, stay aware, and we'll be back soon. Thanks for watching Shadows of Evidence.